This is a video about archetypes. An archetype is an idea, a symbol, a pattern, or a character type, often found in stories or in myths. When we're studying literature, we borrow this term from psychologist Carl Jung, who had this idea of the collective unconscious. That means that in all societies and in all countries and in all time periods, according to Jung, people have had these inherited or inborn patterns when it comes to myths and storytelling. That's why when we read a story and we notice a trickster character, we sort of know that character already, even when we're just introduced to the character. That's why so many different cultures have some sort of hero figure who has to be in exile at some point or who has to go out on his or her own. So we see archetypes all around us in literature, but also, of course, in film. If you want to study more about archetypes, you can look into the work of Canadian scholar Northrop Frye. Some examples of archetypes that you might be familiar with when you're reading fiction might be something like a young ingenue who moves to a big city or who moves to a new place. It might be, like I said before, a trickster character. It can even be something that goes beyond just a stock character or a character type. It can be a pattern that you see in film or in literature. So even something that can be cliche might be considered an archetype. Now, hopefully there's a difference between an archetype and a cliche. So an archetype might be something like the mad scientist character that we see in so many stories and in so many films. But we also have characters or patterns in literature that are a little bit cliche or overused or kind of tired, like the man who has a midlife crisis who goes out and buys a convertible red fancy car. So there is some overlap between archetyping and stereotyping or cliches, but ideally archetypes introduce you to a character. They tap into something within us that knows these character types already, that knows these patterns already, that kind of senses that the character is a young orphan character who's going to go out to do great things. That's why I have the picture of Harry Potter before you. Or the character is a mad scientist or a damsel in distress. That we know certain things about the character before we even read along, but that doesn't mean that the character lacks specificity. Hopefully it means that the author is tapping into those archetypes, but without stereotyping. As you read the stories, think about how archetypal figures are functioning in the story. Are characters able to realize that they are interacting with some sort of stock character? Do they recognize when they meet a villain character? Do they recognize that character as the villain? In literature, we often don't use a term like villain. When we're talking about children's literature, oftentimes these archetypes are really delineated, right? Villain, hero. In literature for adults, it tends to be a little bit more complicated, but we still see these archetypal characters. How do archetypal elements reveal something about the character? So how does knowing a little bit about what type of character this is going to be before we've read too many pages of the story, how does that actually reveal the specificity of the character? How does it give us some clues as to the theme of the work? And how does it help us relate more emotionally when we're reading the story?